Okay, here we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us from around the country and indeed around the world. I'm Joe Prisco. I'm the chair and sometimes called the founder of New Literary Project, and we're based in Oakland, California. Our program today is brought to you by NewLit TV, produced by Todd Donahue, assisted by Abby Donahue, with additional support from our friends at Simon & Schuster. Thank you. For the next hour, we're going to be talking with the 2025 winners of the Joyce Carol Oates Prize, Jennine, Capó, Crucet, Willy, Vlautin, and Joyce. These writers succeed Ben Fountain, Manuel Munoz, Lauren Groff, and all the others over the years. And this is an award not for a particular book, but for an author, a mid-career author of fiction, someone who's emerged and still emerging. So before we go any further, a serious tip of the hat to the other finalists for the 2025 prize. Sarah Manguso, Julia Phillips, and Morgan Talty, first-rate amazing authors, all of them. Acknowledgement also for our jurors, Laura Kogan, recently editor-in-chief of Zizova, Mark Danner, and Hertha Dawn Sweet Wong from the Cal English Department. And thanks also to our judges, the NewLit Board of Directors, and our NewLit team led by Diane Del Signore, Executive Director, with Abby Donahue, Hannah Onstad, Camila Aguirre Aguilar, and Ian Maloney. Joyce Carol Oates Prize is a working prize, and the winners will be in residence in the Bay Area in November at Cal and at St. Mary's, culminating on Sunday, November 9th, for our blowout 10th anniversary celebration at St. Mary's College. So stay tuned for details, if I may say anachronistically. So in addition to the Joyce Carol Oates Prize, NewLit supports free writing workshops at no cost for teenagers throughout the Bay Area, conducted brilliantly by our partners, the Cal English Department and the MFA Department at St. Mary's College in California. And thanks to the Bonnie Benetti Bell Fellows and the Iris Starn Fellows. The workshops take place at Girls Inc. and Juvenile Hall and elsewhere. In addition, we fund Jack Hazard Summer Fellowships for creative writers who teach high school. Thus far, 34 Jack Hazard Fellows from 18 states around the country have received $5,000 summer fellowships. We also curate an annual anthology of NewLit connected writers, Simpsonistas, published by Rare Bird Books and distributed nationally. Big thanks to Tyson Cornell. Volume 7 will include work from Joyce, Jennine, Willy, and many other luminaries, including the young people from our workshops who say they have been changed because of our workshops. We also offer a NewLit book club in its early stages of growth. In sum, all of our efforts revolve around promoting a literate democratic society with an all-in commitment to support arts education, which has been eviscerated in schools and society at large. As for NewLit, we may be a small organization, but people say we punch above our weight. And that may be the last boxing illusion today, but I'm not counting on it. Okay, so without further ado, Joyce Carol Oates comes to us from Princeton University, New Jersey, where she is a beloved teacher and, as everyone knows, a towering figure in American and world letters. We have come to know and appreciate her more all the time as an honorary director of the NewLit board. Her Substack, A Writer's Journal, is a must-read eye-opener, and her most recent books include the spellbinding Fox, Hogarth, published by Hogarth, and Butcher, a novel. Okay, from working class Nevada to working class Miami, our JCO prize-winning authors take on immigration, climate change, music, justice, violence, and lost opportunity. And they do so with humor mixed with the tragic, devoid of sentimentality and packed with compassion. Along the way, they tell the stories of a distressed horse and a captive orca who are impossible to forget. In the largest sense, together in a sense, these two writers amount to, in the words of Joyce, an allegory of America. Jennine Capó Crucet comes to us from North Carolina. She is a writer and educator. She's the author of 4 books: Make Your Home Among Strangers, How to Leave Hialeah, My Time Among the Whites. Her most recent book is Say Hello to My Little Friend. She's worked as a professor of creative writing, as a screenwriter, college access counselor to first-generation college students, and as a sketch comedian, though not, she says, all at the same time. Born and raised in Miami to Cuban parents, she lives in North Carolina with her family. Editor is Tim McConnell. Publicist is Hannah Bishop of Simon & Schuster. Willy Vlautin comes to us from rural Oregon, where he has just returned from his latest hit European tour with his band. Born and raised in Reno, Nevada, Willy is the author of 7 novels and is the founder of the bands Richmond Fontaine and the Delines. Willy started writing stories and songs at the age of 11 after receiving his first guitar. Inspired by songwriters and novelists like Paul Kelly, Willie Nelson, Tom Waits, William Kennedy, Lucille Berlin, and John Steinbeck, he works diligently to tell working-class stories in his novels and songs. His editor, Amy Baker of HarperCollins, wrote these, to me, very moving remarks about Willy's books. She wrote, "Through each of his remarkable novels, I've been impressed by the power of his words. I find myself still thinking about his characters and wondering how they're holding up in such difficult times and hoping they're getting by." Welcome, Willy. So I hope the 4 of us will engage in conversation with each other. We also hope along the way you might illuminate what the JCO Prize has meant to you personally and share some thoughts about your career arc. And you don't need to use the word journey when you do so. Okay, let me get the ball rolling. You're both emerged and emerging authors. How would you say your writing has changed over time? Or maybe not the same question, how you have changed as a writer over time? I'll start with Willy starting. You go first, Willy.
Jennine's smarter than me, so maybe she goes first, and then I can figure something out.
I mean, my plan is to just say ditto after everything you say, Willy. Like that was going to be my, or yes and kind of situation, you know. I mean, maybe we can go back and forth.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea.
It's a lovely question and one that I think it's probably time I start thinking about that. Like, how has it changed? One quick thing I know is my very, very first book was a short story collection. And then I wrote a novel, and then I wrote an essay collection. And so this is the first time I've done something, I've worked in the same genre with Say Hello to My Little Friend being a novel. And I think what I found is that I'm more captivated by the long form these days, or the past few years of my career, than I was, I used to think, oh, nobody has time to read novels. And so that's why I would write short stories. And then it was more that I didn't have time to write a novel, and that's maybe why I wasn't doing it. So I also think it's been even though there are more demands on my time, it's somehow easier to prioritize the time to write because it just now I understand it as my vocation and not a hobby, or not, there's just been enough like confirmation that the books will find an audience and be out in the world. So I feel like compelled to keep writing them in ways that early on in my career, I don't know that was a strong motivator. What do you think, Willy? I don't just
I started writing novels, I think at 18, just for fun. I didn't tell anybody that I was doing it. I didn't really take any classes. I never wrote, I wrote short stories, but I wasn't very good at it. And I wasn't a fan of it because I always felt like I could feel the writer writing it. And my favorite thing about novels is forgetting that somebody wrote it, that I'm just living inside this thing. And so I just wrote them, before work, after work, till I was 35. And then when I got one published, I felt like I just got invited to a little party and I was begging not to get kicked out. So I just kept writing harder and harder. I don't know if I've gotten better or worse at it. I know I work harder at it. It seems like I always feel like I'm digging a ditch when I'm writing and I don't know where I'm really going. And then I make a huge blunder. I'll take a left when I should have gone right. And then, as you know, when you're writing, it takes so long to redig the ditch the other way just to get back to where you were before you got lost. And then you have to go in the direction that you think is right. Well, I seem to do that every single book. in that regard, I don't think I've gotten better. I always say to myself, you're not gonna take a left when you should go right, and waste a year or two on going down a bad path. But I seem to do that every novel. So I don't know if I've gotten worse or better, but Jesus, it's fun to do. I love it, and not having to do it before work is having like not having to like drink 4 cups of coffee just to try to see straight at 5 in the morning, and then write badly and then go to work, is heaven. So I feel just lucky. I feel lucky that I get to do this during the daylight.
Joyce, you want to jump in with a question?
Oh, sure. I have a whole lot of questions. Well, I'll quote Willy, and then it's a question that also is for Jennine. I really loved, I've seen some interviews of yours. I really love the remark, all my books started as songs. I thought that was so touching. And I was thinking in terms of say hello to my little friend, that the music of the language is what's so beguiling and engaging and special about that novel. And then with Willy's work, I read other work of yours also. It seems to me that you have this, the music is the simplicity of a ballad, the kind of song, or folk song, or country music, or bluegrass that everybody just identifies with. It's a music that we all have been hearing, and it's maybe a music that rises from a setting, kind of lonely, rural settings, people driving in cars long distances. And Jennine's music is the intense, very condensed, urban, kind of feverish world of Miami, where people are jammed together, and there's a different kind of syncopation and percussion. So do you just want to talk a little bit about those thematic connections and similarities and differences that you have?
Well, yeah, I always felt when I started really thinking about novels, I said to myself, I wanted to feel like the novel, like the one you held, Northline. I wanted to feel like you dipped the whole novel into a sad ballad, like a really melancholy ballad. And that was always my goal, to write novels that, when you hear a beautiful ballad and it stops you in your track, you could be driving down the street and you hear it and you could start crying. Like, I've heard songs where I've had to pull over. And so my goal was always to hopefully have, by the time you finish the book, it makes you feel like a sad, melancholy ballad. So I don't think about music or rock and roll or any of that when I'm writing a book, but that feel is what I've always chased.
And then your character, Al Ward, has written so many songs, and people even invite him and pay him to write songs. I was wondering if that person has some autobiographical connection with you. Like he begins after his uncle, I think, has died, Uncle Vern, and then he's very lonely, and then he's taken on by his mother. Is it his sister's boyfriend?
His mother.
Yeah.
When I
Yeah,
finished
and the boyfriend takes him to his first country music concert, I think, or
yeah, Buck Owens.
yeah. And so was that your experience?
The strange thing is, when I finished that book, I gave it to this old friend of mine that I'd known for like 40 years. And I didn't think it was autobiographical, And then he said, "Man, that's the closest book you've ever written to you." So I think I was blind to it. But yeah, I leaned on music, in the fact that you could put on a song and then disappear. Like, I didn't think about performing. I didn't think about any of that. I just fell in love with the idea that you put on a song and then suddenly you're not you anymore. You're inside this world that's beautiful or sad, but intense, and you're free from yourself. So I think that's what I fell in love with music. That's what, half ruined my life and half saved my life with music.
I thought it was
So, so
very beautiful. I'll just read this because I obviously the connection with being a writer is so evident. Maybe it was because Al's mother and Vern had always had the country music station on, because he'd never been to a live music show before. But seeing Buck Owens that night became a marker for everything after. It wasn't the suits or the adulation that came from being on stage that attracted him, nor the idea of money or fame. It was that when they played, he disappeared. When they played, suddenly Al wasn't Al anymore. He was transported inside the noise and rhythm and melody and story. It was as though suddenly he understood that just by song playing, he was able to vanish from himself. I thought that was very beautiful.
Well, thank you for it's a real honor that you read it. Thank you.
Jennine,
Jennine, so Pitbull's a huge figure, and he gets the last word in "Say Hello to My Little Friend." So that was on your playlist too. I know.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of an affront to music, though, and that is the point of his inclusion, or the way that he sort of gets used as a character in the novel. Yeah, so but it is in some ways and I hate to admit it, I think in a lot of ways his music is kind of like the epitome of of Miami in a lot of ways, right? In the way that Joyce sort of said, like that there's like a rhythm and a pulsing and a compression in it, and it's fast and it's meant to be consumed and then moved past and not reflected on. It's almost there's a kind of like ephemeral nature to it built in, and sadly thinking a lot lately, or in the past like 5 or so years that I was writing the book about climate change and thinking, I read this other book called Disposable City, or The Disposable City, about the way Miami is sort of being used and positioned as a something. I think the most chilling quote from it was something like, "There's maybe 5 or 6 business cycles left in the city of Miami before investors are sort of like, well, we're leaving this to the sea." And that was sort of I felt like, what is a better soundtrack to the sinking of Miami than a Pitbull record? Um, just music that I don't know that we'll be listening to in 100 years, much like we won't have a city like Miami above water in 100 years. Probably a lot less than that, sadly. So I was taking, I mean, I do write to music too, to put myself in a place. And so I understand the importance of it. And I wanted to kind of like really make it very obvious in the novel by making the narrator, or not the narrator, but the main character, a guy who's a Pitbull impersonator who's been asked to stop. It's like that's what starts the book, is that he's not allowed to do it anymore. He has to like sing a real tune for the first time.
well, I just have one more remark to make. I think that speaking of the being the reward award to two people, sort of as an allegory, as Joe had quoted, I think that one, the loneliness of the ballad, the storyteller of the rural America, and then the intensity, and as you say, the fleetingness. When you're in a place like Miami or any other, really condensed urban community, you don't really have a tree line. You almost don't have a skyline. You're just sort of seeing buildings, and you're seeing people on expressways driving along. As you say, there's a sense of the ephemeral. And I think the language that you chose to express this is really brilliant, because it's like a fever. And when we read your novel, everything is accelerated, and Izzy is just carried right along. He's not really in control. He's just sort of a character in a movie almost. And I won't give away the ending because it's quite surprising and dramatic. But at the end, that's all the more evident that he's not in control anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe now's the time. If you could say a couple of sentences about uh, for people who don't know, "Say Hello to My Little Friend," or don't know the horse. Can you give us a little bit of a picture, just a little short something for our listeners our viewers to understand about your novel?
It's tough to I've been doing this for like a year and a
I'll
half,
hold
and I
this
still
up.
can't. I still can't. It's a hard book to summarize, and every time I say a new thing, it sounds more and more improbable. But it's roughly the story of a failed pit bull impersonator who decides instead to model his life on Tony Montano's the main character in Scarface, the movie. And so he tries to do that, but then his life intersects with a captive orca in the Miami Seaquarium named Lolita, who was a real whale. And it sort of, I don't know. And then it just goes from there. I really wanted to write about a whale. And I figured the way in was this other guy who would have an encounter with it because it turns out it's really hard to write a novel about any character who's just trapped in a concrete vat full of water, right? So he needed an avatar. Yeah, that's
That's
one of
great. No, that's beautiful.
Scarface
That's
meets
terrific.
Moby Dick, but because it's about Miami, it's way shorter than Moby Dick could ever be.
That's very interesting, Jennine. That is so interesting. Because I was going to ask about both of you, what were the, the genesis? I would not have guessed that. I would have guessed that the two came together simultaneously, but you started off with the orca.
Yeah, we can. I will. Yeah, we can talk more about
Oh,
that too.
yeah.
I want to hear about Willy's book too, because I know we have a lot of overlap in some weird
Yeah,
ways.
yeah, it's really interesting, the overlap. Go ahead, Willy.
Yeah, but when I mean, I guess the genesis of mine, the idea of the horse was, I was researching a book called "Don't Skip Out on Me" and I was in Central Nevada where I grew up camping, and a friend and I were 35 miles from the nearest paved road, and we came across this huge, vast desert playa, and we saw what looked like a statue of a black horse, and so we drove pretty close to it, and then we got out and walked closer to it to find out it was just an old wild Mustang, and it had the scars of an old man over it. It was just littered with scars, and then as we got closer we could see it was completely blind, and it just stopped me in my tracks. I'd gotten off the road, I'd been touring a lot, my life was kind of sideways, and I was struggling with why I was still playing music and why I leaned on art so much in my life, and why I've never been able to be strong enough to handle seeing things like that. I'm too sensitive for the world, I think. And so when I got home, the idea of why a guy does art, whether people like it or not, and that horse, I just wanted to be around that horse. And so I wrote the life story of a journeyman musician out of Reno, like a casino musician who's kind of lived his whole life like he's gotten the wind knocked out of him. He's just never been stable on his feet. And then he ends up living on a mining claim in Central Nevada. And one day he wakes up and that horse is there, and he thinks he's gone crazy, but he's not sure. So I combined the two just because I just wanted to be around that horse, in my own way.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So we have these, I think what you both accomplished is astonishing in that Lolita and Izzy have this deep connection, and this horse and Al have this deep connection, and you never feel anything but surprised over and over again by the connections between their lives. And I mean, that's what made there is, and believe me, I don't know how conscious we were, Joyce, when we selected these writers, but it is amazing the overlap here,
Really
and it's just astonishing. Well, let's get to a related subject here, if you don't mind, Joyce, unless you had something else you wanted to say. Okay, so I want to talk about the blue collar characters in both of your novels and how committed you are to what, and there's an expression that Willy uses in The Horse, what do you call them? The ledge walkers, people who walk on the ledge. And you're fascinated by the characters who do that. And I think the same's happening in Jennine's novel too. Can you guys talk about that? How you're committed to telling these stories of these blue collar people, and what drew you to them?
Yeah, I can start. I think throughout my career, I've sort of seen Miami written about. I mean, for me, the short answer is that those folks are more emblematic of the city of Miami than anything I had seen in literature that purported to be about Miami. And it's sort of seen in television and media and in literature and a lot of books as like sort of like a glitzy place, and it's, it's South Beach, and it's and it is all those things as well, but there is a whole other side to it that is the foundation of that, and that's the community in which I was raised. And so my first book, How to Leave Hialeah, is, I mean, that Hialeah, it's not a great title for a book in a lot of ways, because often people would be like, oh, who's Hialeah, who is she, and they think it's some sort of book about leaving, about a relationship ending, but it's really Hialeah as a place. And the nickname for Hialeah is water, mud, and factories, which is like the slogan for the city. Sort of, and then that's the place I'm from, and so the characters who populate my books are the people that I grew up around, and it's folks that work in those factories, and it's folks that are familiar with that part of Miami and would never think to go to South Beach except as tourists themselves, right? And sort of like drive by on a Saturday night and people watch, which is what we did growing up. Well, we didn't hang out down there. We sort of like looked at it and then went back to the real Miami. So once I started writing, I would have people tell me like, "Oh, have you read this book? Have you read this book?" Other books sort of set in Miami, and I was like, "Where are these people writing for? Like, what version of the city is this?" It wasn't one I was familiar with, and I figured that I took that as a sort of mandate to write the stories that I knew, and the stories that spoke to those communities, and to myself, like writing the versions of Miami that I would have wanted to read about, and I've been doing that pretty much in every book since, except for maybe the one where I like lived in Nebraska for a little while and it was nonfiction, so I couldn't, say I was still in Miami for that. But
I think for me it was you know, in middle school and high school I was taught, like obsessively taught, John Steinbeck. And at the same time, I was raised by a single mother who, got paid less than the men, was sexually harassed all the time at work, but she couldn't quit because she had no confidence, and she had two kids, and she struggled mentally as well. So she was juggling all these things, and I thought, I never felt like I had much talent in the arts, but I always knew that those were the stories I wanted to write, because I thought it was heroic that a guy would get up every day and go to work at a job he hated, or my mom went because she had to. And as I worked, sadly, I've worked in nothing but warehouses, and I was a house painter, was the best job I ever had for 12 years. And I struggled going to jobs I hated. I really struggled with it. And so I always thought it was heroic that people could work all day at jobs they hate to sacrifice for their family, so I think I just have always written those stories, because number one, they are the only stories I really know, and I'm really drawn. I'd get huge crushes on like the lady at Safeway, the checkout lady, like, and I'd be like, man, she deserves a novel. Or I worked with a janitor once. It was really cool, and I was like, why can't he have a novel? And so I was always attracted to that. And the ledge walking, I just thought, man, I've been a ledge walking dude my whole life. And that's why I probably leaned on art so much and music so much to pull me back or make me at least feel comfortable while I'm walking that ledge. So it's just something I've always kind of had him dangling over me, or it's, a chain around me a little bit. But, that's why art's so important, I think, because it can pull you from off the ledge a little bit.
if I can just say really quick that phrase of like it feels like a little bit of a chain around you. I was feeling that with this last book of Miami, feeling the same way, like like place being such a fruitful like thing to write from, and then also feeling like, is this always going to be what I do? Can I, like, is my imagination just live here? And I tried with this last book, I mentioned Moby Dick, which is just like everything that Melville knew about like whaling was in one book, and I was like, I'm just putting everything I've ever wanted to say about Miami in this book, and I'm going to invent a structure that lets me just have these random chapters that just let me info dump about whatever thoughts I've ever had about this city, or that this, and put them through this narrator. And I was like, that's it, and I never got to do it again. And then of course that's not true, right? Like the minute the well drains, like it's Miami, so it comes up with water again. But I feel that, Willie, like very strongly, that sense of a place being like it's got you too, like it goes both ways.
So let me follow up with both of you are saying. So we find in our workshops, for instance, dealing with kids who are finding their voice for the first time, these teenagers. And there was one kid the other day said, "Gee, I found my voice, and I wondered, what's a person without a voice?" It never dawned on, and then she found her voice. So what occurs to me is there are words we used in education and the arts everywhere actually. A word like marginalized, and I think, okay, yeah, I get the point. But what you're talking about is when people are on the margins, or that they don't their stories are not being told. They're not front and center enough. They're not centered. And so we see this in the workshops, and we see it in both your novels, that these characters become centered in a way that, everything that we stand for at New Literary Project is all about. So, all to say, you dramatize, both of you dramatize something that's so crucial, I think, for education, the arts, everything we're doing.
Thank you for saying that, man.
I can ask a question more like from the writer's point of view. Did you each know when you started off with your novel how it would end? Because I was surprised in a good way by both endings.
Me
I
too.
really, there seemed to be a trajectory in the horse that I thought I could perceive, but then the final chapter surprised me and it went in a different direction. It even involves a sudden appearance of a dog in a very positive way. And I thought this is it's such a great ending, it's so much more generous and magnanimous than I might personally have written it myself. So I appreciated that. So Al Ward goes off with a dog at the end, and there's a horse and there's the dog, and they're both alive and they're all alive at the end. Then with Jannine's novel, I was truly shocked by the ending. Again, in a good way, it made me think, and I've reread that ending several times, going back even for several chapters leading to the ending. And I was just so curious as a writer myself, with both your examples, whether you knew what the endings would be when you started out.
Usually, before I start a novel over a cup of coffee, I could tell you the arc of a thing, and it usually stays pretty much the same. All the things in between change, but like the emotional impact, I always shoot for the same emotional impact. The truth is, with the horse, I love musicians. I always have. I feel the most comfortable around them, and I couldn't leave Al Ward without a friend, so I gave him a dog. I gave him money. I gave him money, and I gave him the dream of dreams. Is he lives next door to a retired English teacher who thinks he's cool. So that, to me, that's heaven. He's got a lady, he's got money, he saved the horse, and he's got a dog. And now all he has to do is fight his mind. And if he can fight his mind enough and let himself be happy, maybe he'll have a good run. So yeah, I couldn't leave. I've stranded a lot of guys in a ditch in my books, but I could never do that to a musician. I just couldn't.
Well, thank you. So,
Thank you.
Jennine, you said you worked on your novel for 5 years.
Well, it started, from when I got the idea to submitting that final manuscript in to my agent to start looking around, it was 9 years. And I actually wrote 2 books in between that.
Wow, that's so
and
interesting.
to just go back to that, to early on, the question about the book's origins, and I was like, I really wanted to write about a whale, and this particular whale, right, Lolita, and like what was like just sort of her plight. But I was also writing this other novel that I thought was this like high satire of like making fun of Scarface. And it took a couple years to realize they were the same book.
Oh, really?
And I was like, this is impossible. It can't be the same book. And then I was like, oh my God, it's working. It's working. Well, maybe. I was like, or I'm crazy. But maybe it's working. It's one of those two, and I'll find out at the end. To answer the current question, which is no, I did not know how it was going to end until about, I'd say, a little more than 3/4 of the way through. You could say, I mean, I had an idea that Izzy's fate would be what it was, given that, again, the models for this were Scarface and Moby Dick, and we both know that Ahab and Tony Montana end up super dead at the end of both of those books, right? So that you can, it would be kind of bizarre if that didn't happen. But as you know, and people who will read the book will see that's not the true ending. There's sort of like a coda or another ending to it that kind of makes you rethink the rest of the book and maybe where it was coming from. I did not know that that was how it was going to end. And it was, I think, one of the most exciting moments of my life, which is really silly because I was like in my pajamas, writing. When I realized that this thing I was writing was actually going to be the last chapter, um, I was so excited because I was like, I can't believe it's going to end this way. I can't, like, even I was like, oh my God, can I really pull this off? And then there was a version of the book where the last two chapters were transposed, where the last chapter was the penultimate chapter and the penultimate chapter was the last chapter. And I realized that was a completely different feeling that I would leave the reader with at the end. And that was not the feeling I wanted to leave them with. And so I sort of put them back the way that they appear in the final book. But that was, I sort of wrote that chapter, the last chapter independently, as like a riff of like, why does anybody make art? Why does anybody do anything artistic? How can those desires and that impulse become corrupted by capitalism or pop culture? I don't know. It was like it was just this like very bizarre chapter, and I was like, "Is this how it's gonna end? Oh my God, let's see what happens." So that was very exciting. I did not know it was gonna happen, and I was very happy that it worked, um, or worked enough.
Well, thanks for ruining the ending of Moby Dick for me. Never
Yeah,
mind.
the whale wins. The whale wins in that one.
Uh, Joyce, any more on that? Can we go in a different direction or what?
Oh, well, I think both writers have indicated a little about some of their early influences.
Yeah, that's great. That's important. Yeah, let's go
Like,
for it. Go for it.
was this something that you both read when you were really quite young that profoundly influenced you?
I mean, I think the first book that like devastated me, I was like 12. It was called My Side of the Mountain. It was about a Gene Craighead George. It's about a boy that runs away and lives in the forest by himself. And I think that was the first time I really realized the power of books, because I wanted to be that kid more than anything in the world. I was always trying to run away, dreaming about it from a little kid. And so I think it was that. And then, as I got older, like I said earlier, Steinbeck was kind of a hero to me just because all his people were beat up. And so it just kind of went from there, and then I discovered William Kennedy, and I read Fat City by Leonard Gardner.
Right.
And I didn't know you could tell stories like that. Larry Brown was a big guy for me because he just told stories about things I understood or people that made me feel comfortable, maybe.
I was just going to mention Fat City. When you
I was hoping you would. What did you like so much about the book? Because I know you're a big fan.
Oh, well, I'm not really saying that it's a great novel, but it's the sort of thing that you feel the empathy for these failures. They try so hard. When I wrote a book on boxing, actually some people wrote to me who had said, I love boxing. I lost every fight. I don't care. I still loved it. And they wrote these sad letters to me. It ties in with your Al Ward, who keeps writing songs, even though his life hasn't gone so well.
Yeah, I think that aspect of Fat City, like a guy still trying to get by the thing he is known for, the thing he was the best at, and knowing it's not like his little boat is sinking and he knows it, but he keeps thinking it's not going to sink. I think there was something about that book that I've reread maybe 10 times just to get that same feel of a guy trying to regain a little bit of his dignity, or he tries to shave and dress up one more time to act like he's somebody. And I just always related to that. And I remember, I collect first editions of that book, and you have a blurb on it, which I think is really cool.
Well, one of the interesting things about your writing, and I think Leonard there are also, you don't really have a reductive cliche sort of political context where you're not suggesting that Al Ward and your other characters are the victims of some larger political force or society. You're really locating their being in themselves. And I think that the reader appreciates that these are not weak, passive characters, really. They persevere and they keep on going. And I think readers really identify with that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was always interested in guys that try really hard and then shoot themselves in the foot at the same time, and which I think a lot of us do, and a lot of guys I knew growing up do. Which is you always have to get up in the morning and you always have to try, but some guys do that and then they'll sabotage themselves along the way, or they just don't believe they're good enough to deserve anything good, and that's a whole different story than politically.
So
But-
it sort of sounds like Izzy, Jennine, right? It sounds like a characterization of Izzy, his desires to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, to sort of address the question of influences. I know I didn't, unfortunately, I didn't grow up in a household, I think because of language reasons, where books in English were like readily available. So I was mostly, I would hang out at the library, but it wasn't until really high school that I discovered that I enjoyed reading. And I think I know the first book that I read that made me think that literature could be like extremely powerful and didn't feel like a book I had to read for school was Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Yes.
And I read her as a Florida writer, and I just remember thinking like this is a version of Florida that I don't know and that I feel so lucky to have encountered. And then I think I was like 16, and then I read everything she wrote, and then eventually found the work of, I don't know how it leapt over, but I eventually found the work of Elena Viramontes, who had written a book Under the Feet of Jesus. Maybe it's because Their Eyes Were Watching God and Under the Feet of Jesus, and like they both end with like God, Jesus, like that librarian was like, "Oh, you like this book with this? You'll like this book with Jesus in it too." And ended up being a huge fan of her work so much that it kind of motivated me to apply to the college where she was teaching, and it was the only college I applied to. I was the first in my family to go to college. My dad is an electrician, and he dropped out of high school and ended up going back for his GED. Um, and my mom, I mean, she finished high school, but neither of them had gone to college. So I was like, well, maybe I'll go to college. And I applied to this school that Elena taught at, Cornell. I ended up getting in and was like, oh, but had no idea all what that meant and like the financial burdens of that. But I ended up going there by kind of telling my parents I was a biology major, and then ended up just taking creative writing classes the whole time, and figured out they don't call your parents and tell them that you're not doing what you told them you would do. So that was a small thing I kind of took advantage of being a first gen college student. But then once I was in college, just sort of reading voraciously. And most recently with this novel, Say Hello, I would say the big influences for it were Percival Everett's The Trees, and Paul Beatty's The Sellout, and Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown. Those three books sort of being there's sort of a lot of the metafictional elements in those finding their way into this novel. And just I felt like those three novels made me very, very brave. I also say Percival Everett's Erasure, which I read early on in my sorry, I'm going to say journey towards becoming a writer, and just sort of a fierceness of that book of what it wants to take on, and feeling very just like empowered by it in some weird ways that I felt like, oh, I want my books to be in conversation with this book someday.
And then at your college is where you met Manuel Munoz, who is previous Joyce Carol Oates Prize winner, beloved around here. So
No, sadly we did not overlap, but
he knew you somehow. He was so happy to see that you won. He was very
yes, we
pleased.
know each other again because Elena is like a saint, and
Right.
introduced us there was a time where she and Manuel were invited to give a reading in the town I was living at the time. And I was just like a townie, and this was an area with real town and gown issues. And she like asked that I be invited to this reading that was like only for the campus. She was like, "Oh, I have a friend in town. Can she come?" And then she insisted I come on the dinner. And so I was just like, "What am I doing here?" But it was really wonderful. And he signed my book, and he was touring for Faith Healer of Olive Avenue at the time, and he signed my book. Uh, with other things, but ended it with like, "Hey, we're waiting," which I just like, I had not published it, I think even a short story at that point. So it really encouraged me,
Sweet.
that like we're waiting. And I was like, "Oh, Manuel is waiting for me. I better work, I better hurry. I better write some stuff, get it out in the world."
That's a sweet
Yeah,
story.
that is our
That's sweet.
connection, is through Elena Viramontes. We share a
Yes.
mentor.
Well, I think three of us have one thing in common. I don't know about Joe, that we were the first people in our family to go to college. I mean, is that we all have that?
My mom and dad went to college. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm from a long line of school teachers, and so education was always the main thing. But for me, so
it's not really in your novels, though. I mean, the character.
no, I mean, I really struggled in school because I was so shy that I could barely get through school, even college. But and I had no real interest in it. My mom was like, "You either join the military or you go to college." And I was like, "Man, I don't want guys yelling at me. I'm tired of guys yelling at me, so I'll go to college." And um, but I've never had interest in writing about it. I think because I never really embraced it. I just kind of sat in a library and read novels for most of it. So I did go to college, but I don't feel like I did, if that makes any sense.
Well, I mean,
Yep.
your characters are very working class, or they're not even employed. I
Yeah,
mean,
well, that's me after I was 21. I went straight from college to loading trucks for a trucking company for 5 years, and then various bad jobs. So I guess I just always write from that point of view.
So to answer your question, Joyce, I'm the only person in my family to graduate from high school. So this is
hey, that's so interesting.
yeah,
Well,
it's,
me too.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, me too. The only
right.
in my large family, actually.
Me too. Same, yeah. It's
Okay,
great.
well, we're competing for who came from you know,
Marginalized, the
the most
marginalized community. So Jennine wrote that wonderful book, Your Time Among, I just lost the title,
My
Notes on
time.
Unfinished Education, which is sort of in this vein, right? What we're in right now, or no?
Yeah, a little bit. That book is a series of essays that started as columns for when I worked as an op-ed writer for the New York Times. And many of those were also, so my first novel, Make Your Home Among Strangers, follows a first-gen college student, the first year of her college experience that gets abruptly politicized with a giant sort of like immigration event that polarizes her community back home and polarizes her campus, and she's sort of stuck in the middle of that. And it ended up kind of striking a chord. It came out in 2015, uh, sort of around the first Trump presidency. And so it ended up being selected as a common read or a first year read at a lot of American universities. And these places like very graciously would invite me to come read at their college or give a talk. And so I found myself writing a lot of essays. And then I sort of like casually mentioned him to my agent at the time. And he was like, "Whoa, whoa, I think that sounds like you wrote a book." And then we sort of put them together and realized that it was, and that we had like more than enough to sort of think what was a through line through a lot of these. And so that's where that essay collection sort of, I like to say is like my accidental book, but there was a lot of intention that went behind and into each of those essays. Also, my process for writing an essay, because I'm not trained as an essayist in any way, it was like whenever I had to write something for the New York Times, I would just be like, like a Muppet at the keyboard, just pounding just writing. I'd write like 5,000 words or 7,000 words and then try to find the 1,200 words or 800 words I was allowed. Um, the
Okay.
column, they'd be like, "We want 800 words by, the end of the week about this like huge thing." And I'd have all these really complicated ideas, and then I'd have to
Yeah,
distill that down into something that they could
right.
run quickly. But I still had those really long versions on the computer,
Right.
and those became the essays in that book.
So another subject that occurred to me that's really, I think, deep in both your novels is figure of motherhood and family. And there's a kind of pain there, especially in Izzy's dramatic search for his mother's story. And And in the case of Al and his mother, I mean, I sense there's some depth that's uh, in the novel that is, I can't, there's no point you're making. It just feels like it's deep within the story. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. But you're not asking a question, so I don't have anything to say. I'm like, yes, Joe, you did it. That's right.
Was that it? Was that a good question?
Agreed. Is it a question? Willie, did you hear a question? Is there anything you want to say?
What is the figure
No,
of motherhood? Where does the motherhood, the mothers in these novels seem to be driving the characters in ways they don't understand completely? How about that? How
yeah,
conscious of you were that process going on? How about that for a question?
Okay. I mean,
I mean, for me, yeah. I mean, I hate saying it, but yeah, the mother in the horse. I mean, she's real similar, I guess, to my own mom a bit. Um, and I guess I didn't really realize that until until I was, like I said earlier, my buddy goes, "Jesus, man, what are you doing?" I didn't really think about it. I guess because I was writing about a musician, it all ended up. I tried so hard to circle away from myself, only to circle towards myself without really knowing it. So a lot of my characters all throughout are from broken families. It took me a lot of years to not throw dads through windows in my novels, and I tried to grow up with that, grow up and tell a bigger story. But a lot of the stories I tend to write are from broken families, just because it's kind of what I understand. And my relationship, I guess, with my mom was similar to that in a different way, but a little rocky. She was not a big fan of a guy being in a band and a guy that liked stories, and that kind of stuff. So it was a tricky situation. So that leaked into the novel without me really even thinking about it. But that's the way that stuff works sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. I would add to that well, the short answer is like, Joe, that's a great question for my therapist. I'll let you do it.
Yeah, I should have
I didn't tell
said.
you. I didn't tell you. I am a therapist. So go on.
But yes, I think so. I mentioned my first novel being about a first-gen college student who goes off, and all the whole time I was out with that book, people were like, "Is this you? Is this based on your life? Is this you?" And it wasn't. My family was very supportive of me going off to college once we got everybody on board and could kind of explain what it was. And honestly, once the financial aid package came and it was like generous and that it became feasible, right? And it was like we all got to go to college was the feeling. And in that book, that's not what happens. And so in trying to make the character very different from my own experience, I just took all these things and changed them, right? I even in my mind made her taller than me because I mean I know I project tall, but I'm 5'2". So when I was like, if she's taller than me, she would literally see the world differently than I would, right? From a different perspective. So I felt with this book. I did have this desire to write a book that no one would ask me if I was the character. And I was like, I will make it a fucking whale. So nobody's going to ask me if I'm a whale. And nobody's going to ask me if I'm a guy named Izzy who used to be a Pitbull impersonator. Like I was just like, go, like, try to ask me if it's me. But much like Willie, I think what leaked into this book and also I tend to write a lot about families and all of my books prior to this one have a lot of family. And I was like, I'm not going to be pigeonholed into like only writing about family. And then somehow what leaked into this book was a guy, I was like, I gave him no family. He doesn't know his father. He doesn't know his mother. He literally doesn't know what happened to these people. And then what is the whole book about? Him searching for that. So I ended up falling into the trap of the thing I was trying to escape. And the one thing I will say in terms of it being in any way personal is this is the first book that I wrote, and it's that the bulk of it got written while I was or in an estrangement from my family for various reasons, and it is a healthy estrangement. And I think that like the sense of trying to figure out what happened to Izzy's mom is also a sort of internal search of trying to figure out what has happened that things have gotten to this point, right? Or that something like an estrangement was necessary. So I think that's part of it. That might be the thing that like I was conscious of it once I saw it and then tried to revise away from it as much as possible until I saw that I was like damaging the book. And then I was like, hey, what's there is there. You gotta accept it. It's what makes the story feel real.
Well, even Lolita is yearning for her mother throughout the novel. I mean, the first pages of the novel knocked me out. In the last pages, when we're reflecting on Lolita's consciousness, it's just astonishing. And the same with the horse. I mean, I'm not a sentimental guy, but all Italians don't think they're sentimental. They're
Mm.
wrong. So, I mean, but that horse and that whale, oh my God, it's just
But
astonishing what you did. Without sentimentality, you did something fantastic with these creatures.
I think
Unbelievable.
there's that thing where you chase this, at least I do when I'm working on something, you chase the soul of the thing, of like whatever, like the blood of what you're trying to say. And then that's when I lose track of like you were saying, like of changing the names and the faces enough. And then I lose because I just start chasing the soul of it. And then it ends up being, at least in this book, it ended up being a little closer to home than I wanted it to be or thought it would be. And because I was just chasing a certain feel. And man, that's rough when, because I do every book. I'm like, I'm not going to write about, alcoholics and broken families. And then somehow it always goes back to that. So in some form or another. So I don't know.
So Joyce, I don't know if you have something else in your mind. We had a few questions that came in. I think this is actually a first for me with these questions. You actually answered almost all these questions in the course of this conversation, but I'm going to just see if there's something new here. So how much reading did you do as children? You already talked about that, Willie, that book that meant the world to you uh, as a young man. And then Jennine, Moby Dick, you were reading when you were a child, right? That's what
Like
you were
4 or
saying.
5 years old. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good movie.
Uh,
You're-
And so what inspired you to write this book? I think you've both been speaking about that throughout the entire conversation. And let me see. Here's a question so now that you've won this Joyce Carol Oates Prize, what's next for you? What's the next song that's going to become a novel? And what's the next creature that's going to become your novel? Any thoughts on that, or is that a silly question at this point? By the way, pass on it if you want.
It's not a silly question. It just feels so like I don't know. I'm one of those writers that if I talk about it too much before it happens, I'll kill it. Um, but it's sort of like two competing ideas that, well, watch them be the same book. That seems to be my pattern. But yeah, I keep it, I don't know, I gotta be careful with it because nothing kills something fast. I think because I also am working on like TV adaptations where where most of the writing is actually talking. You're talking with other people, you're trying these ideas out. So now I feel like one of the big differences for me between those two art forms is like not talking about it very much and writing about it instead, like trying to get those ideas down on paper first before I let them like feel the air. Um, so yeah, sorry, not to be too cagey about it, but I'm just not.
No.
I gotta be careful.
I mean, for me, I guess it's always about like the Joyce Carol Oates Prize makes me it gives you confidence, It's always for me, it's always buoying up my confidence. I always got to keep my confidence level going, so I work hard, and that's always been a battle with me. But I just finished a book on I was so ashamed being a house painter. You see, my cousin went out with a house painter, and he was like he was a convict house painter, and he treated her bad, and she was the greatest of all time. And so I had a real chip on my shoulder about house painters. I always hated them. And then, 5 years later, I was one. And so as I got older, and I did that for a lot of years, and as I got older, I said, well, I'm going to write about a hero house painter. I'm going to make a hero out of a house painter because I was so ashamed of me being a house painter. And so I just finished one about a house painter in North Portland, and it's probably my easiest going book, and hopefully my funniest one, but it sticks a knife in too. So I'm pretty happy with it. So we'll see.
That's great. Joyce, anything else
No,
on your mind?
I was actually going to ask what they were both working on now, but they've answered that question. Yeah.
This is great. So this has been fun, I hope, for everyone. I think you've shed so much light on your work and on your artistic vision. And I think it's very inspirational to talk to. And we're going to be meeting each other pretty soon. November, the first week in November, we're going to have our big 10th anniversary celebration of New Literary Project, culminating on November 9th at St. Mary's College of California. Maybe Willie will have his guitar that day. He'll play.
Sure, I'll bring it.
We don't have enough money to pay for the songs that you're in your song list, though, to play at the event. That's what our IP attorney says. No, you can't do that. So anyway, any other thoughts before we leave?
Oh, I just want to thank you. I'm so honored, and it's so nice to meet you, Joyce. I've been reading you most of my life, and I've been nervous all day about this, so it's just really damn cool to be here. So thank you guys.
Same. Thank you so much for bringing us here together to have this conversation. And Joyce, it's a real honor to be in the space with you and with you as well, Willie. And Joyce, I do have to say I've used telling stories as a textbook
Great.
so many semesters of my
Thank
teaching
you.
career, and it's just such a wonderful tool. And just thank you for making my job as easy as possible as an instructor with that book.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're very happy to have chosen you two, and we look forward to the future. So thank you very much.
Thank
See you all in
you.
November.
Take care.
Bye. Good luck.
Ciao, ciao.